Please welcome the AERA Executive Director, Dr. Felice Levine.
So let me start by saying it's really an honor and a privilege as your Executive Director to welcome everyone to the 2025 AERA Annual Meeting and to officially open with our plenary session. It's okay, we like the clapping and bringing the community together. We are thrilled to return to the Mile High Sanctuary City for the first time since 2010. So much has evolved over the past 10 years, our language, our understanding, our values, and that growth continues as we progress as a field and ideally as a broader society. The energy in the meeting room and hallways already on day one reflects the incredible vision and dedication of President Janelle Scott, along with her program co-chairs. Stand up for a moment. Catherine DeMarco, Maria Jamar, and Lorena Losa. Together, this foursome really forged a remarkable program that will unfold in many, many ways that you would not necessarily see at a traditional annual meeting, including a wonderful documentary series that is part of the presidential program this year. The dedication, along with all of this hard work, deserves a special thank you for your work, commitment, and impact. At the heart of this meeting, and indeed of the education research community, is a deep commitment to inclusion and support for scholars and scholarship across broad spectrums of background, research approaches, career stages and aspirations, and arenas of inquiry. The continued vitality, innovation, and advancement of education research and all fields of scholarship depend upon a shared commitment to rigor and to reflection on our work and to openness, the free flow of ideas, and the mutual sharing of those ideas as we advance our goals together. On behalf of the association, I want to thank you all for what you are doing in your work and in your research and scholarship every day, for being drawn to education research and to the next generations in our field, and for the many of the next generations, 30% of our membership here today at the meeting. This is an annual meeting that elevates those concerns and illustrates the benefits of collaboration, communication, and the benefit that brings to advancing science and scholarship and the advancement of that work. This opening plenary, chaired by President Scott, comes at a pivotal moment for higher education. She will guide an essential dialogue focused on the future of our institutions, particularly schools and colleges of education. At a time when academic freedom and core research values are increasingly under threat, she is joined by a distinguished panel of scholars and leaders who will share their perspective in our living room and interact around some of the most challenging issues we face today. We hope that this brings us a new level of thought as we kick off this meeting and an engagement that continues throughout the meeting over the next 5 days. It is now my great pleasure to introduce an exceptional scholar, a generous leader, and a committed mentor, AERA President Dr. Janelle Scott. Say a few words. Janelle, or Dr. Scott, is Professor of Education at the University of California, Berkeley, a former elementary school teacher. She is widely recognized for her influential work on the politics of educational policy in a multiracial, unequal, and segregated society. Please join me in welcoming to this podium my close friend, my colleague, my trusted advisor, Dr. Janelle Scott.
That was great. Thank you.
Sparkling, right?
Naila. Good evening. It's so wonderful to see this room so full and to see so many wonderful faces here. Thank you, Felice, for that generous introduction. Thank you again to the Colorado Youth Mariachi Program for getting us started with such beautiful music. And thank you to Catherine DiMartino and Haria Jabbar and Lorena Yosa, co-program chairs extraordinaire. With them, I'm thrilled to welcome you to this opening plenary. We honor and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. We acknowledge the land and the history of this space. We recognize the indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this place. We also acknowledge the history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. We recognize that the US engaged in actions to displace and harm indigenous communities. We respect the many diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land. We also acknowledge the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants who worked this stolen land and who continue to disproportionately face economic oppression, racism, violence, and exploitation. So we're gathering tonight amid deep challenges, as you all know. Federal actions have resulted in the dismantling of research infrastructures in the National Science Foundation, the Institute for Education Sciences, and the Department of Education. Our higher education colleagues have lost their research funding, preventing them from pursuing important research agendas, funding doctoral students, and supporting scholarly convenings such as AERA, all activities that are the lifeblood of higher education. Similarly, schools of education have lost essential funding for teacher training programs created to address a dire national shortage, fostering a climate of confusion for students and faculty alike. And at the state level, legislatures continue their attacks and censorship on higher education, threatening academic freedom, core programming, and job protections. The value and purpose of higher education is under unprecedented scrutiny and review. As an association of education researchers, it's imperative that we collaborate and consider how to respond to protect academic freedom and the right to learn. Indeed, the theme of this year's conference, which calls us to consider how research can contribute to remedy and repair, propelled us to focus on higher education for this plenary. To help us make sense of this present, to contextualize the past, and to reimagine our shared futures, we've brought together an incredible panel of scholars and higher education leaders. I will introduce them now. First, I'd like to introduce Sarah Wilcox, who is the Deputy Director of Scholars at Risk, a global movement to protect academic freedom and support those who face attacks for sharing ideas and asking questions. Sarah oversees SAR's internal operations and programming, including SAR's protection, advocacy, and university relation efforts. Prior to SAR, Sarah directed the Scholar Rescue Fund, serving 15 years from its year of inception to develop the program. For over 20 years, she has advised in the establishment of a number of scholar protection programs in the US and Europe, and has served on the steering committees of various advocacy organizations, including the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack and the University Alliance for At-Risk Migrants and Refugees. Welcome, Sarah. Oyan Poon is co-director of the College Admissions Future Collaborative and consultant on higher education equity to the Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker's office. Her research focuses on the racial politics of Asian Americans, education access, affirmative action, and admission systems and practices. Dr. Poon co-authored amicus briefs defending diversity and race-conscious submissions submitted to federal courts, including the US Supreme Court in the SFFA versus Harbor case. She is also the author of an award-winning book. Who's giving you that award, I wonder? AERA? Asian American is Not a Color, Conversations on Race, Affirmative Action, and Family. Her work has appeared widely in national media outlets, including NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic. Welcome, Mayan. Sean Harper is one of the nation's most highly respected racial and gender equity experts. He is a provost professor in the USC Rossier School of Education, Marshall School of Business, and Price School of Public Policy. In 2022, he was appointed university professor. Dr. Harper is also the Clifford and Betty Allen Chair in Urban Leadership, as well as the USC Race and Equity Center's founder and chief research scientist. He served as the 2020-2021 AERA president and the 2016-2017 Association for the Study of Higher Education president. Additionally, he was inducted into the National Academy of Education in 2021 and appointed by US President Joe Biden to the National Board of Education Sciences in 2022. Dr. Harper has published 13 books and over 100 other academic publications. His research has been cited in over 25,000 published studies across a vast array of academic fields and disciplines, and he has been awarded more than $26 million in grants. The center he founded also procured more than $25 million in contracts and investments during his 14-year tenure as executive director. His work has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and other news outlets have quoted Professor Harper and featured his research. He's been interviewed on CNN, MSNBC, ESPN, and NPR, and he's testified twice to the United States House of Representatives, spoken at numerous White House convenings. Dr. Harper served on President Barack Obama's My Brother's Keeper's Advisory Council, on the National Education Policy Committee for the 2020 Biden-Harris campaign, and on California Governor Gavin Newsom's statewide task force on higher education, racial equity, and COVID-19 recovery. Welcome, Sean. Brian McKinley Jones Brayboy, Lumbee, is Dean of Northwestern University's School of Education and Social Policy and the Carlos Montezuma Professor of Education and Social Policy, a member of the National Academy of Education and a fellow of the American Education Research Association. Brayboy studies how different knowledge systems reveal the ways that institutional structures support or hinder underserved students, staff, and faculty. An anthropologist by training, Brayboy is also concerned about how culture and cultural practices can support Indigenous students and communities. He recently co-authored the study, Ethnographic Methods, Training Norms, and Practices in the Future of American Anthropology, which was the most read article of 2024 in American Anthropologist, the flagship journal of the American Anthropological Association. Brayboy came to Northwestern from Arizona State University, where he was the president's professor in the School of Social Transformation and vice president of social advancement. He also served as senior advisor to the president, director of the Center for Indian Education, and co-editor of the Journal of American Indian Education. He has been a visiting scholar in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway, and his work has been supported by the US Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, and the Ford, Mellon, Kellogg, and Spencer Foundations. Over the past 17 years, he and his team have helped to prepare more than 165 Native teachers to work in American Indian communities and 43 American Indian PhDs. Brayboy earned his bachelor's degree at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and his master's and doctorate with distinction at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the father of 2 sons. Welcome, Brayboy. And last, but absolutely not least, is Danielle Hawley. Danielle Hawley is Mount Holyoke College's 20th president. She's a lauded and sought-after expert on a wide range of educational, civil rights, and equality subjects. Her insights are routinely sought by leading global media outlets, including NBC, CNN, NPR, and the Boston Globe. In her first year at Mount Holyoke, President Hawley convened students, faculty, staff, and alums to develop and launch an audacious strategic plan MHC Forward, with priorities grounded in academic excellence, student experience, operational leadership, and resource stewardship. MHC Forward charts a bold vision for Mount Holyoke's next decade. President Holly is also a professor of politics. She is currently teaching a seminar on the Supreme Court, advising student theses, and advising MHC's brand new undergraduate law review. She serves as co-chair of the board for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law and is an Aspen Institute Liberty Fellow. She also served on the board of the Law School Admission Council, among many appointments. Prior to Mount Holyoke, President Holly served for 9 years as Dean of the Howard University School of Law. She holds a BA from Yale University and a JD from Harvard Law School. Her contributions to higher education and the legal profession have been recognized with numerous awards and accolades. Welcome, panelists. Oh, it's very squishy. Okay. All right, I wasn't expecting that. So I know I could just sit here and these folks could talk and I don't even have to do anything, but I'm going to go ahead and ask a question just to get us started. So as we're thinking about what's going on in higher education and the challenges, from your standpoint, what's top of mind? Like as you think about this, sundry challenges in front of us, what's top of mind for you? And how are you thinking about that?
Am I to go first? So thank you, first of all, for including me on this incredible panel and to be here in front of all of you. AERA is just an incredible organization. I wish I knew more about AERA leading into this. You have been a consistent member of Scholars at Risk, which I can share a little bit about in a second. And I just commend you for being here and creating the community that you do. Scholars at Risk, the organization I represent, is slightly a departure from, I think, the rest of our panelists because we have a global perspective to higher education. And we have one that is sort of reactive and responsive to threats to academic freedom. Scholars at Risk was founded 25 years ago on the premise that we should all be looking to and responding to threats to academic freedom, threats to scholars just like yourselves, attacks on institutions, and it is our mission, therefore, to bring institutions together, institutions like AERA, colleges, universities around the world, to stand up to threats to academic freedom, and that includes threats to individual scholars. So over 25 years, we've seen these threats manifest in horrific ways. Scholars have been killed for the research that they've written, for the work that they've taught, for the ethnicity that they represent, for the gender that they are. Scholars have been imprisoned. They've been forcibly disappeared. Scholars have been dismissed wrongfully from their positions, censored, families have been threatened, and the list goes on. And we, as an organization, try to monitor and bring attention to these threats, not only to the individuals, but as the higher education sector as a whole. And the reason I bring this up is because it is a global phenomenon. It's not just in Yemen. It's not only in Sudan. It's not only in Venezuela. It is in all of those countries, but it is also very much here in the United States. And we're quickly learning that that is ramping up quicker and quicker day by day. So our mission here is really to look at higher education and to bring solidarity. And I think the challenge that Janelle is asking about, I see really as a concern of isolation and fear. It's, I think, the greatest challenge facing higher education globally. And I say that because it is the undercurrent to all the threats that are facing academics around the world in terms of violent attacks, imprisonment, disappearance, control of what you teach, how you teach it. It is a mechanism of authoritarian institutions, of authoritarian regimes, of some even democratic regimes, paramilitary groups. And isolation is the essential goal. Isolate the one scholar to silence the scholar next to him or her. Isolate the one scholar to silence a whole academic department. Isolate one scholar to shut down a whole institution. And we've seen this around the world, and we're seeing it now more and more in the United States. And I'm sure you're well aware of what's happening on your own institutions. So again, I bring this in to say that isolation and fear is a tactic. It's well worn, it's effective, and it's destructive. But it can be countered by solidarity, such as yourselves here gathered today, and hope. And I sort of laugh at myself saying hope, because if you know me well, you know I'm a pessimist. So I'm leaning into this idea of hope because it really is the only thing I can really lean on, that I think it is hope of organizations like AERA. It's the hope of the individual scholar that stands up and says, I will not be silenced. It is the hope of the academic department that stands up and says, I will voice for my people, my organization, for the inclusion of all perspectives in higher education. And so I think that, I'm trying to focus on the positive. I think it's very difficult when just 30 minutes ago I read a new article. I think just the news is out that the sort of secret weapon is now attacking accreditation institutions in the United States. Every 5 minutes I feel that there's a new attack on higher education. So I leave one last thought in all of this, and it is to educate ourselves on what academic freedom truly means. I think many of us sort of lean onto this assumption that we really know what it means and what it really means for the greater good. And it's SAR's mission, sort of behemoth mission, to bring attention to academic freedom via that one scholar who is imprisoned, via that one scholar who's been attacked, but also through the institutions that are under threat through threats to their autonomy, to their inclusion efforts, and really think about what academic freedom really means, and not just for your own research, but for the greater good. Think about how the process of truth-seeking, which effectively is what academic freedom is, how are you seeking the truth? What is the process involved in that? And what is the intention of that process for the greater good? And I think if we can bring ourselves out of the sort of individual thought of that one scholar and bring it out to the greater good, it's not only an intention here for the United States and for your research here, but for the global good.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So the challenges to higher education, I think there's so many that it's keeping me up at night pretty much every night thinking about all of the challenges that we face. I would say the biggest challenge to higher education is a challenge to our underlying value proposition. Is it worth it to get a bachelor's degree? What do our institutions stand for? Are we institutions that are about indoctrinating people ideologically, or are we about freedom of inquiry? Are we about academic freedom, et cetera? Things that we didn't need to explain 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We really have to start back at the basic building blocks. I read a Pew Research study the other day that said only 22% of Americans said that even if they have to take out $1 in loans, they do not believe a bachelor's degree is worth it. Mm-hmm. And we know that that's counter to the research that we all know about the value of a bachelor's degree. In 1990, you earned 32% more if you had a bachelor's degree. Today, it's close to 70% more. And there are active forces in our country, including, unfortunately, our current federal government, that want to convince us that it is in our best interest as a country to destroy the universities. That is one of the mantras of our current federal government, is to destroy the universities. And the question is why, and why have we become so vulnerable to a basic attack about who we are and our values and what underlies our institutions? And I think part of it is why, and I can't wait to hear from the rest of the panel, is we have not been very good about talking about what is it that we actually do inside our classrooms, inside our institutions. I always like to say when people encourage us or kind of accuse us of ideological indoctrination, I always say, I can't even get my students to read the syllabus. Listen. How am I going to indoctrinate them into anything? Listen. They don't even know what they're reading next week, right? But our refusal to talk about the fact that we educate students. For example, I've taught at 3 very different universities. An R1 in a very conservative state at the University of South Carolina. I've taught at one of the major mission universities in the United States, Howard University, and now I lead a women's college, a liberal arts women's college. And what I can say that all 3 of those institutions had in common, from the most conservative, like South Carolina, to the most liberal, like where I am now, is that we all believe deeply that we were there to generate knowledge, to teach our students, and to disseminate knowledge more broadly to the public and do things that are good. One of the things that I was most heartened to see was that when Harvard filed suit, or when they said that they were going to challenge the current government attacks on higher education, they put up a new website that is all about what the research that comes out of Harvard does, right? So Harvard has become associated with elitism, which obviously it should be, but it is also associated with cancer research. It is also associated with playwriting. It is also associated with producing lawyers that defend our democracy. It is critical that we not allow the narrative of who we are to begin and continue to be spun out by people who are hostile to our sector. And the second thing I'll say that really, and I hope that this panel will really tackle it, that is challenging, I think, in our current higher ed environment, is the anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion movement. I've seen this firsthand on our campus as we have lost our research funding. And our research funding is being lost because, as National Institute of Health told us last week, when they canceled a sub-award that was about documenting the achievement of women in business, finance, and science, that, quote, the work on gender is non-scientific and has led to very few research benefits for society doing research on gender. So that means that research on women, our government has said, is non-scientific and leads to very few benefits for our society. That is untrue. But that is what is being told to us as we have our research dollars taken away. So when people say that they are anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion, they mean that they're anti-paid leave, they are anti-flexible work, they are anti-figuring out what the impact of research is on women. This is not just about excluding Black people and Latin people from public life, which is what the pitch has been. We don't want these people in public life anymore. But that's not what this is about. It is about the exclusion of lots of different kind of people and research exclusion that will have tremendously negative impacts on our communities for decades and maybe a century to come. So we must right away begin to talk about why it is dangerous to say that in a multiracial democracy that you are anti-diversity, that you are anti-equity, that you are anti-inclusion. That is anti-democratic in a society in which we are a multiracial democracy. And we have to be clear on that. The silence, the relative silence around the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion are going to destroy this country. And we have to stand up right now and say, if you are attacking a huge portion of this country, we have to remember this country is now only 56% white, which means that if you are anti everyone else, you are anti a huge portion of this country. And I think if you are silent on this question, then you're silent on the future of our democracy.
Absolutely. Janelle, you asked what was top of mind for us. In this very moment, it is gratitude for you, for your extraordinary presidential leadership, and for bringing us together. It is also top of mind for me is gratitude for Felice Levine, who has led this association with such incredible brilliance. And it's also gratitude for Tabby Chavis, who has accepted the invitation to lead the next chapter of the association as its next executive director. Please, a round of applause for these three extraordinary women. All three of them are women. Women still matter. Women are very important to this association, to our field, to our planet. They always will be. regardless of what the NIH or anyone else says. Janelle, so what's been top of mind for me for really, I mean, I've been Black my whole life. So for 50 years, I've woke up Black. Racial justice and racial equity have always been and will forever be top of mind for me, more expansively and more inclusively. For the entirety of my 27-year career in higher education, women have been important to me, top of mind. Queer people have been top of mind for me. That remains the case. Look, as we think about the politicized attacks on higher education, all of it is alarming to me. Everything that has been spoken so far horrifies me. I think our democracy deserves better. You know, for the past 5 weeks, I've been traveling around the country with a 5-person film crew shooting a documentary film. And it is about the impact of the elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives on campuses in just about every geographic region. It has been heartbreaking to sit with chief diversity officers and former DEI professionals who have lost their jobs because of petty, ridiculous partisan politics. It has been heartbreaking to sit with queer students and with women students and with Black and Latino and Asian American and Indigenous students who are mourning the loss of their mentors, the loss of their protectors, the loss of advisors who have invested in them. It has been so stupid to sit with researchers who've lost their research grants and can no longer fund their students, the next generation of education researchers. You know, I will just say that these past 5 weeks, I mean, really the past 3 months, but most especially these past 5 weeks have been really tough as I've heard people, you know, give real-time narrative examples to the headlines that each of us wake up to each day. I do not believe this will last. I think there will be a breaking point when we will have enough collective courage to say enough. It can't be one of us. It can't be just a handful of us. It has to be all of us. It has to be everybody who is here in this room. Regardless if you are a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, whatever your political affiliation is, this is not at this time about partisan politics. It is about saving our democracy. It is about defending truth and evidence. This is a research association. We do research. We value data and evidence and knowledge and truth. And I just feel really, really strongly that we have an educational responsibility to do more with what we know, especially in these times. But we got to do it in coalition with each other. The coalition has to be tripartisan, nonpartisan, whatever you want to call it. It has to be multiracial. It has to include women, men, and gender diverse people, gender queer people, right? It just, that's what the moment requires of us. Otherwise, we all will have gone back. Remember last fall, there was a hopeful chant, we're not going back. We don't have to. Despite the bullying, despite the intimidation, despite the threats to our funding, we don't have to go back. Might we leave this room with a collective declaration that we're not going back? I'll just stop there. That's top of mind for me.
So I have a lot on my mind, and I think my colleagues have touched on a lot of those things. You know, some days, I don't know if some of you all feel like, I don't want to get out of bed. This is a lot, and it feels like the news is just coming at us like fire hoses from all directions at all times. And like this moment, it's this one piece of headline, and then the next moment there's another one. I don't know what to do sometimes, right? So, but then I ground myself back in what you're saying, Sean, right? We have to do this in collective. And so I'm gonna touch on a couple of other things that haven't perhaps been discussed explicitly just yet. I'm gonna take it really personal right now. My family immigration history is tied to my father being an international college student. So that's very much top of mind for me right now. I was born to him while he was in college, right? He and my mom had me when he was still studying. I think he was a college senior. And so I think a lot about that. And, you know, right after the executive order about birthright citizenship, I was also thinking about whether or not my parents got their green card before or after I was born. And what that means for my status here in a way I had never thought about before. And I was angry at myself. I was angry that I had to, at myself, right? I was like, I know constitutionally, I hang out with a lot of lawyers, right? And so I had a fellowship at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund last year. I spent a lot of time with lawyers, right? And so I was angry at myself that I was like doubting the constitutionality of my legal status. But that's where we are, right? So I'm thinking a lot about, especially here at AERA as well, we have a lot of international students and scholars in our community. So I just want to say I see you. And I think we need to make sure that in the coalition building and the community building and looking out for each other and having each other's backs, that we remember our international colleagues. Yes. And quite frankly, you know, in Illinois, and I'm thinking about my consultant position with the governor's office right now around higher education, I know that there are, and it's not just in Illinois, there's a whole lot of colleges and universities that would not be financially feasible, fiscally, you know, possible without international students, and we need to check on that. And check about, like, it's that relationship, right? That accountability as well in a more humanizing way. The other thing is I'm thinking about is because we're in Colorado, I spent 3 years at Colorado State University after starting my tenure track career in Chicago, in Loyola, Chicago. I moved here to Colorado State. I'm a city girl, okay? Fort Collins, Colorado was an exciting adventure for me, and I had an amazing scholarly community in Fort Collins, just about an hour north of here, got tenure there, but the only way that was possible was the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs on that campus. And the legacy that those spaces had, that community space, and I just ran into somebody from one of the Black Cultural Center there earlier today, and we were just reminiscing about how important those spaces were, because about a month or two ago, Colorado State announced that they would be shuttering down those spaces. And that felt like another very personal attack, because that was the lifeblood for my family and I to make it work in Fort Collins and actually have really joyful places to be, and a place where we could count on each other and build community. And I think there's a struggle right now about what do we do with these centers, and so there's a moratorium on shutting the programs down, but that took a lot of what I saw was student mobilization, faculty, staff mobilization in a way I never saw in the 3 years I was at Colorado State. And so that was really heartening, right? So these are the things that are bringing me back out of that, I don't want to get out of bed today. And then finally, I just want to end on a more happy note and, you know, get us towards, you know, motivating ourselves. This last week and a half has been hope-giving, right? To see coalitions coming forward. Rutgers just kicked off a resolution for faculty senates for the Big Ten Academic Alliance. So if you don't know, the Big Ten is more than just sports, right? It's actually a coalition of 18, I believe, universities from Rutgers, the East Coast, all the way to California, It's quite an athletic conference, but also an academic alliance. And so the Faculty Senate at Rutgers, the faculty decided, hey, let's leverage this tool called shared governance that we still have and start a resolution about creating an 18-campus compact, to your point about coalition building, right? A compact to defend academic freedom, right? So that was really exciting to see, and I believe places like Michigan and Michigan State have passed it. I think Northwestern Faculty Senate had, for the first time this week, a faculty quorum in its whole history. Passed several really exciting resolutions and is also considering this Big Ten coalition compact. So there are things that are happening here, and I'm seeing, to your point, President Hawley, around Harvard saying like, hey, there's all this research. I think the other thing we need to do about telling the story better about higher education is a place like the University of Pennsylvania or Harvard. I grew up in Boston, Harvard, right? Like, it is a major economic driver. Do you know how many people in the Boston metropolitan area are employed by this one university, in Philadelphia by the University of Pennsylvania, in Los Angeles by UCLA and USC, right? These are huge segments of the population. I think that's the other story we need to make sure that we center as well, that we are the lifeblood of so many of these communities, and sometimes we forget that.
I asked to sit in the pocket seat, and now I have deep regrets about it. Mostly because so much of what I wanted to say has already been said. I was listening to NPR last week on Friday, and they were interviewing someone whose research had been paused, and it's research on water and lead in water. And this scholar noted a number of times that work on lead in water is apolitical, and that it didn't have any ideological bearing. And I sat there and I sort of thought, how do we explain Flint? How do we explain Detroit? How do we explain Jackson, Mississippi? Right. How do we explain Standing Rock, South Dakota, if water and water poisoning is apolitical and ideological? He went on to say, we're completely confused. This is not political work. And I think what was important in that is the absence of what this scholar didn't say, which is that other work is ideological and political and somehow less than. I think we've lost the narrative. I think we have ceded the terms of the debate about the work, so that now it's a taken for granted assumption that somehow if your grant's being canceled, it has to be canceled because it's not real research. The scholars have gone through really rigorous processes about their work. That for NSF, it's about scientific merit and broadening participation, same kinds of ones that this person doing the work on water was doing. We have to take back the terms of the debate. We have to talk about the importance of to the points made earlier, the importance of higher education and its contributions. We produce people, that is, people who go out into the workplace. We produce ideas that change the future of the planet. We produce things, and sometimes those things save people's lives. Sometimes they make our listening pleasure better. Sometimes they help us think differently and become more critically. And we've done we've lost the narrative that somehow we're doing the ideological brainwashing. So what keeps me up is, how do we explain the importance of the work? How do we reset the terms of the debate so that we understand, like, every part of this room is made better by the work that we've done. Our children read better than because of that work. We write better. We think about policy differently and better. And I think we're not doing a good enough job of talking about the incredible accomplishments of what's happening. I want to just add a point here, which is I also stay awake at night while we think about the attack on DEI is the attack on climate change work. And it's all out of Project 2025. And it is fundamentally related. And if we lose the thread here on the importance of climate change work and institutions needing to lead on this, it's wild to me that they are this federal government is simultaneously canceling grants around climate change and then coming up with plans about how to increase the population and have more children. It is a wild thing to me that we aren't paying attention to the fact that young people in this country no longer want to have children. It is the greatest place of anxiety for young people. And we continue to just kind of ignore it and push it aside. It's not separate from DEI. It is fundamentally part of the work because it is those communities, those underserved communities who are most profoundly impacted by what's happening with climate change. So I stay awake wondering, like, how are we going to reset the terms of the debate, whether it's around DEI, whether it's around our mission, purpose, and values of institution, whether it's our contributions, whether it's climate change. There's a whole bunch of other things to say, but I'll stop there.
So I want to give you all an opportunity to respond to each other. You all touched on slightly different things, and then there was some convergence. And if anyone wants to respond to a thought that anyone else expressed or ask a question.
I'd like to ask a question of a college president, which is the concept of competition among institutions. And how I think, particularly in America, higher education has become so fiercely competitive for research dollars, for international students, for rankings and systems, that I think there's been a trend, perhaps I'm wrong, but my perspective is that there's been a trend of inward looking and protectionism of institutions rather than, as we're discussing, solidarity, Big Ten compacts, joining together. And I wonder if that's been a hindrance to the reaction to what we're seeing. And are universities and colleges waking up to that concern? And is it a concern?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it goes to exactly what Brian was just saying, which is, how did we lose the narrative, right? How did we end up losing the rhetorical war around higher education, a war that I don't think many of us knew we were even involved in until the minute it came to our doorsteps, when it became a campaign promise to destroy the universities, right? So how did we get to this point? And I think a lot of it, I would point to two things. Yes, competition, even though ironically, there are less and less students, which is interesting, that you would think that we are competing. There's a lack of, I think, resonance around there are less students and they're more racially diverse, right? So some aspects of the competition issue don't make a lot of sense. For example, if I were a large state university and I was canceling DEI, I would wonder, how am I going to recruit the students that I actually need on my campus for the next couple of decades, because less and less of those students will want to come here if they think that we're anti, certain populations, and those populations are what are needed to make up our schools. So yes, there's competition, but there's also a lot of behavior in terms of policy, et cetera, that does not match up with this idea that we have a smaller group of students that we're appealing to. They're less white than ever, and we're getting more expensive, and they're less able to afford it. So there are lots of parts of the competition issue that aren't matching up. So that's the second thing that I'll say is, we do need a close self-examination of how we got here as higher ed. We are not blameless, right? We lost the narrative partly because we lost affordability. And lost accessibility. Why do people believe that universities like Harvard and Penn and Northwestern and all these other schools, Michigan and Ohio State, have nothing to do with them? Because less and less of our kids are getting into these schools. when you go from having acceptance rates that are, they were low, 20%, but you go to 4%, 5%, and we know how need-driven, how many elite schools and selective schools are looking at issues like, can the student afford to go here? And making that a huge part of the decision-making around admissions, which is the truth for a lot of our colleges and universities. Less access to the middle class, less affordability, and a focus that is not on all of our students, but only on some, I think has left us open to significant criticism. So I'm hoping that we will see, like Sean was saying, more collaboration, more coalition building because we need it, but we need to take a really, really close look at the way we've been thinking about the market and how that market has really turned into a place that allows us to be vilified. I went to the Hill to lobby about a month ago. I said, I felt like a tobacco president, right? That's how unpopular higher ed is. So somewhere along the way, we went really wrong, and we have to begin to self-examine and talk publicly about where we failed also.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Let me jump in quickly with perhaps a hopeful and maybe even replicable example of institutions coming together. In 2020, shortly after Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, I created these two alliances. One was with 68 community colleges throughout the state of California, and another was with 71 liberal arts colleges all across the country. Mount Holyoke was one of those 71 liberal arts colleges. For 2.5 years, really, it was the tragedy of George Floyd's murder that helped those institutions see an opportunity to collaborate on knowledge building and skill building and dealing with racial inequities and racial justice issues on their campuses. And they understood that this was not a tragedy that required a one college at a time approach, but they all, with the liberal arts colleges, the 71 of them came together and said, we're going to march in the same direction towards racial justice. We are in a moment of tragedy right now. So I wonder if now is the time to re-engage that same kind of model of bringing together, certainly the Big Ten is good. Sure, bringing together the 8 Ivy League institutions and the Ivy Plus is good, but I wonder if we might consider bringing hundreds, perhaps thousands of campuses together to march in the direction towards truth, towards the preservation of academic freedom, towards the preservation of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what this moment of tragedy requires. Look, let me just say one last thing. And it's about a lie that people tell about people like me. People who do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. One of the biggest lies is that we're divisive. I keep saying we all need to come together. We need to unify. I'm not saying you go over there, we're going over here. It's such a ridiculous, absurd lie. And I don't like being lied on. I'm just telling you right now, I'm a person that likes to bring people together. And that's what this moment of crisis and tragedy requires.
Great.
Brian, did you want to say?
I was going to say, this is for maybe later in this conversation, but at some point we have to talk about our budget model for universities.
Yes.
To this point about accessibility, to think about state and federal disinvestment, really starting before this, but really in the 80s, with neoliberalism and Reagan and Thatcher really pulling out, wanting to lower taxes and pulling that out. I think that's an important point for us to think about as we move forward. But I also want to say that I think one of the things that sometimes keeps me up at night is the uncertainty. I think as scholars and as researchers, part of what we do is we think about paradoxes, we wonder about a phenomenon or a set of related phenomena, and then we ask some questions. Sometimes we hypothesize, sometimes we just sort of ask what if, I wonder about whatever, and then we seek to understand that, and then come up with some answers. And we often land in some place of some certainty, not entire certainty, but some certainty. And I think we're in a moment of uncertainty that then creates, so I've spent a lot of time saying, I don't know. And that's not great for my mental health and for my work as a dean, but I also think it's not great for faculty, staff, and students to say, I don't know. And so to Sean's point, part of what I want to get at is I think that there's an opportunity, there is a moment here for us to think about where there are opportunities. I think what came out of George Floyd's murder in terms of what he built was an opportunity. And I don't mean this in a transactional, dehumanizing way. What I mean is there an opportunity for us to build coalitions? Is there an opportunity for us to get back to mission, purpose, and values? Is there an opportunity for us to reset the terms of the debate? Is there an opportunity for us to think about how institutions of higher education work differently? Is there an opportunity here for us to think about how might our schools work differently, for us to support faculty, for us to be able to teach students differently? I just think that for me, there's a moment here to ask a different set of questions that bump up against kind of the way we've always done things. This administration isn't like any other administration ever. Actually, that's not true. I can start talking about Andrew Jackson, but I'm not going to. But I do think that we are in a time where we often respond in very traditional measures, and I think we have to respond in really untraditional, pushback, kind of fighting measures that go against our sense of decorum. I mean, I think we still, respect for me is really, really important. So I don't ever want to be disrespectful, but I think we've gone to sort of tried and true methods. I think we've got to look at opportunities and new ways and to do this work, to move beyond the uncertainty, because the uncertainty it can be paralyzing, it can be fear-inducing. And I think we have a choice to say, the uncertainty is going to make me fill the space with something that I want to become, and to create opportunities for futures that we create.
Thank you. So you've all talked about the importance and need for collaboration, for new narratives. So Research Association, what role, if any, does research play in fostering collaboration and new narrative building?
I think part of the new narrative building has to start with that deep examination of how did we get here. I think that research needs to be surfaced and extended. And I'm thinking right now, I'm really struggling with the history of higher education in the last century. Universities were also responsible for the nuclear bomb and all different kinds of ways of destroying the climate, right? We need to contend with the darker sides of it. Like the research, the R&D infrastructure came about out of weapons creation and production that higher education has been very much part of, not just complicit, but really central to, right? And so I think these are not the, narrative grabbing in the political sense that will really uplift us, but I think in creating it, we have to think about that history in order to imagine something different and much more humanizing and transformative. Sorry to bring that up, but yeah.
Perhaps said me never. Maybe we should do what Harvard did. President Holly, I haven't seen that website that you mentioned. I'm super eager to see it,
It's
where
the
they have
homepage.
they've aggregated the impact of the research. I think we have an opportunity to do that in this association, in our field, across social sciences, and so on. Because look, if we're being honest, it's getting late in the evening, so now it's time for some honesty, I suppose. If we're being honest,
What's in your bottle?
we're not so great at dissemination, nor have we ever been. I'm not sure that the nation fully understands what it is that we do and why it is so absolutely consequential and important for K-12 schools, colleges, universities, workplaces, and for our broader democracy. I think we have a real chance here to think very differently and much more creatively about helping to raise the public consciousness of the importance and impact of our research.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think, one of the examples I saw on our campus just recently was I had 2 neuroscientists at my house talking about their work together, and the work that they do when they have undergraduate research students in the lab with them, it's all about how stress impacts substance abuse disorder. Mm-hmm. And they go into the community schools. So Holyoke is a neighboring community. It has a huge Puerto Rican community. Actually, it's the biggest settlement of Puerto Ricans outside of the island on the mainland of the United States. They teach neuroscience, the same research that they're teaching to undergrads, and they use little pieces of straw to teach them the way that brain neuropaths connect. Right? This is the work. So we were talking about the fact that you grew up in Western Massachusetts, just a little bit not far away from Amherst and Smith and Williams and Mount Holyoke. And none of those places ever came and recruited. So I think the point that you're making about dissemination of knowledge, anything that we're keeping inside the university, that we're keeping inside colleges, we need to be out in our communities. And so many of us are, but we're not even telling those stories, right? That was the first time I had heard that our neuroscientists were out working in the Holyoke community. And I think it's really critical that we talk not just about how we do our work, what our work is, but how we are really using our research to make the world better, right? Have a point of view. It's not just creating knowledge, but knowledge for what reason. And being clear about why we do what we do and making sure that people in the community feel that our colleges and universities are a part of them, whether it's as an employer, whether it's part of our K through 12 schools, whether it is part of our health sciences infrastructure in our various regions and states. We need to make sure that they understand what we really do inside the universities and colleges and how it does benefit all of our communities. Mm-hmm. Or it should if it doesn't. Mm-hmm.
So we only have 5 minutes left, which is mind-boggling to me because it feels like we just got started. So I think we have time to just do a round of last thoughts.
Well, I'll piggyback on this last comment. And I'll come back to academic freedom, which I do think eyes glaze over when the mention of academic freedom comes up, but I do think it's fundamentally important to the discussion and higher ed in general. But I want to just remind everyone that, and from Scholars at Risk's perspective, academic freedom really is a fundamental autonomous right grounded in international human rights law. That means every one of us has the right to academic freedom, to pursue truth, to seek truth. But coupled with that is the responsibility. And I think this touches on what we were saying here. Each of you as researchers and academics have the responsibility to take your research and share it for the public good, not to guard it. And as Sean's mentioning in dissemination, I think higher ed does have a real challenge in reaching the public and expressing the importance of the public good of your work. So I think we have to think about rights and responsibilities, and I really do think that's a foundational concern for every academic, no matter what field you're in.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad some people on this panel have been hopeful. Yes, I said I've been working on Diet Coke Rage and Anger for the last 3 months now.
With a smile.
It's really, really good to hear some thoughts about hope, and I think that we all have to figure out what is the one thing. I think part of what's so stressful about this time is there's a feeling that there's so much that's going on. I'm tremendously worried about our international students, tremendously worried about the potential endowment tax. I'm worried about the threat to accreditation. I'm worried about everything. And I think for many of us who are sharing that feeling, I want to try to find one thing that I can do every day to try to make the situation better. For me, it's my work on the side as a civil rights lawyer. I help to co-chair one of the biggest civil rights organizations in the United States, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We just got an injunction against one of the executive orders that talks about stopping the use of DEI. We were helping a group in Chicago that are women who do construction work, and they take pride in giving grants to women to become apprentices in plumbing and sheetrock and all kinds of other construction. And they were threatened by the executive order, and we were able to get an injunction that said that the government is unable to define what is illegal DEI and unable to define. They can't even define what DEI is, let alone illegal DEI. So to me, that was my work of the day, right? And I think we can all take up our own work, whether it is coalition building on our campuses, encouraging students to fight back against the closing of their cultural centers, their clubs, et cetera. I think there's a racial discrimination suit against any college or university that attempts to shut down things like Black student unions, cultural centers, because our students pay their student fees, regardless of race. And why can some students have clubs opening for their student fees and other students not have clubs, which is a very serious question of racial discrimination. So I think we all have to figure out every day what we can do to make things better. We know that there are problems, but we can't focus on everything. So let's live in the places that feel most available to us, most authentic to us, and work to problem solve in those areas.
That's exactly right. Janelle, I know it's getting late, so I will perhaps begin my brief concluding segment with a question. Are we in a fight?
Yes.
I appreciate this. We got some fighters in the audience. I love this. If we're not in a fight, we ought to be. I have to be honest, and this is not judgment at all. I'm not being judgmental, but it doesn't always feel like we're in a fight. I'm going to pick up on something that Dean Brayboy said that I think is right. We have been conditioned to have decorum and to show up gracefully, to show up with confidence in our studies and the research that we do. And, you know, if people are attacking it, well, it's because they don't know better. We know better. We have decorum. I don't know that decorum is going to bring us into the fight that this time requires. It kind of sort of feels like a fight like hell moment to me. But we got to be in it. We got to all be in it together. And we got to bring a collective fighter's spirit to the work without being divisive, without harming people. And certainly that fight ought to be propelled by truth, evidence, data, and care for our democracy.
Yes.
So I'm going to pick up on the thread around the fight and just talk about the different ways that we can fight. I want to acknowledge AERA for filing a lawsuit.
Yes.
That was another point in this last week that I was like, okay, okay, we got this. Another way to fight, right, is we have to remember that I was excited about a month ago when I saw 20 different state attorneys general come together and say, hey, all of y'all colleges, universities, you're nervous about this anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion from the federal government. Guess what? We're watching too. And you can't just go willy-nilly discriminating against anyone. So we're watching too, which I imagine puts college and university leaders in a pickle in some places, for sure. But I think that's another way to fight. Reminders of, there's a bully here, but there's also accountability and connectedness to serving the people, right? And then I want to remind us that we can fight creatively and smartly, right? Unfortunately, part of my job last year, I had to read Project 2025 right after my vacation. I was no longer rested. But immediately the first thing that came to me was, my God, they cannot write. Right? I had to chuckle a little bit. I was like, are these your best? And so I want to remind us that we're smarter. We're smarter. Okay.
We got some writers in the room.
We got some writers in the room. We got some people who can tell stories, right? But we have to be creative. And I'm reminded, a couple weeks ago, I saw this segment on 60 Minutes. And it was about this music nonprofit in Chicago called Equity Arc. I don't know if some of y'all saw the 60 Minutes. It brought me to tears. And it reminded me we can be creative, because this Equity Arc organization had a national competition for high school musicians of color to do a national concert in May and workshop with the National Marine Band. And of course, because of the executive orders, that concert was canceled, the workshop was canceled, but Equity Arc persisted. They did a call out to the community. And they said, hey, we still want to go forward with this concert and workshop. And all these veteran musicians came forward in DC. And Equity Arc was also able to secure a concert hall in the DC metro area. And 60 Minutes found out about this, and they covered it. And during the story, they actually said, and then we flew all the students and their families out, because that's what we do when we interview people for our stories. Mm-hmm. So we're just sticking to our professional norms. Mm-hmm. And the concert happened, and it got recorded, and now a whole mess of folks can watch the concert, and you don't have to just be in DC to see that concert. And so it was such an important reminder for me to be like, we got this. Like, we have so many talented people, smart people, creative people, and we just have to do this problem solving, right? Don't be so overwhelmed. Like, how do we solve this problem one day at a time? Because as an organizational theorist, you have to remember, small is all. Mm-hmm.
I'm an optimist. I wake up singing. This morning, I woke up singing A Pirate Looks at 40, a Jimmy Buffett song, which is about some ruminations of some bad choices he's made over the course of his life. I don't know why I woke up singing it, but it's more frequently than I hope. I'll say what I say to our family at CESP, the School of Education and Social Policy where I am, and to Oyan's point, which is one bite at a time. And we can get overwhelmed in the moment, but I think one bite at a time will help us get there. But the other thing I say to them, and what I encourage you all, thank you for being here, thank you for allowing me to be with you all, that I think is important in the moment, is to take care of yourself, check on the people around you. We cannot do this alone. We have to be together. And so before you leave this room, check on someone, check on yourself, and check on someone else, and continue to do that through the rest of the next 5 days. It is going to have to be a coalition of work that happens. We're going to have to move away from individualized models to collective efforts. And I'm really hopeful about us being able to do that. Thank you for your leadership, President Scott.
Please join me in thanking Sarah Wilcox, Danielle Hawley, Sharon Harper, Oyan Flynn, Brian Greenwood. And please join us for the reception.